Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm Dominique Lukey, and it's an honor to introduce today's program, a conversation about steps in countering hatred. Now, unfortunately, hate crimes are nothing new, but what is new is the disturbing climb in incidents. The U.S. Department of Justice reported that hate crimes increased by nearly 38% from 2020 to 2021, with a total of 11,000 cases reported, an alarming increase. In an effort to help, we've put together an outstanding panel for today's program, moderated by Scinta. They'll talk about some of the root causes of hatred in society, with a focus on the action steps we can take to counter these forces. There will be time allotted for questions from our audience as well. A big thank you to our program sponsors, Leader Ethics, Dave and Barb Scogan, Festival Foods, Joe and Pat Heim, Ann Bryce and Bill Haviland, Tom Houlihan, and Suzanne Young. Our program hosts are the La Crosse Tribune, the Winona Daily News, the Chippewa Herald, and the La Crosse Area League of Women Voters. Thank you so much for your continued support. And now I'd like to turn the program over to our moderator, Sam Scinta.
Hello, I'm Sam Scinta from Leader Ethics. We're so happy that you were able to join us today. A democratic cornerstone of the United States is the ability to accommodate differing perspectives in order to come together and move forward as a nation. This cornerstone is challenged when Americans vilify other Americans from differing backgrounds and beliefs. Sadly, this too often leads to acts of violence. With recent events in the Middle East, hate and violence are once again in the forefront, including the recent tragic murder of a 6-year-old in Illinois. Today, we are joined by two leaders of a growing movement to counter hatred in the United States, to offer insights into the approaches that they and their groups are using to bring people together in an effort to ease tensions and hatred and to reduce violence. Masood Akhtar is an Indian-born, proud American Muslim entrepreneur and community activist. A Madison resident and successful businessman, Akhtar founded We Are Many, United Against Hate, an organization focused on teaching forgiveness and peace, addressing the root causes of hate, bigotry and racism, and building inclusive communities, with a special emphasis on empowering youth. He has received numerous national and state awards. He was among 21 Americans honored at the White House by President Biden under the United We Stand initiative. Arno Michaelis is a speaker, filmmaker, author of My Life After Hate, and co-author of The Gift of Our Wounds. His storytelling stems from an intention to inspire people to see themselves in others and see others in themselves. Arno also works as an interventionist at Parents for Peace, helping to lead people away from all violent extremist ideologies and to support their families. Refuge, his latest film project, is now available on Amazon Prime Video, Apple TV, Google Play, and Vudu. Arno has been a professional public speaker since 2010 and has captivated audiences around the world. His keynotes and workshops leverage noble qualities of compassion, curiosity, and kindness to engage all human beings, building foundations for diversity appreciation and cultural agility. Uniquely positioned to facilitate healing for people who have been targets of hate, he has dedicated the past 14 years to forging inclusivity, compassion, and nonviolence. We will hear from both Masood and Arno today to share their perspectives on this issue of hate and what we as Americans can do to counter hate. After both share their experiences and share their wisdom, I will ask them a few questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for your questions. If you have questions along the way, we ask you to use the chat function in the Zoom to post your questions, and I will then read those off. We will start with Masood.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Sam, for a very powerful introduction. Really appreciate it. And I would personally like to thank Leader Ethics for hosting this very timely event, particularly based on what's happening in our neighboring state. Just a little bit background about the movement. We are many united against hate. To give you a little bit background how I started that. It all started, as you know, being a part of the Muslim community. Since 9/11, I have been actively engaged with our community, organizing events, because we believe that engagement is the way to change the misconceptions people might have about Islam and Muslims. So I've been actively engaged organizing events, educating people to change their perception. And in 2016, unexpected thing happened. I did receive a phone call from a local TV station where they asked, well, there is a discussion in the White House about starting a Muslim registry in America. And that was the saddest moment of my life. I came from India 40 years ago. Didn't know how I'm going to respond, so I went on television and the question was asked. And my response was that I came from India 40 years ago and I gave up my Indian citizenship based on what this country offers. Singling out a minority based on religion is not what America is all about. And I got very emotional at that time. And a thought came to my mind, and I said, but I like the idea of starting a registry that will bring people together, regardless of their ethnicity, color, religion, or even political affiliation. And so I mentioned
I'll take the sourdough milk, please.
Yeah, it's a double.
No. And I don't want ketchup or mustard.
Nope, it just comes with grilled onions.
And could I have French fries?
Do you want a drink as well?
some
Water,
background
please.
going on.
Okay. Is there anything else I can add to your order?
That's it.
Sheila, can you mute yourself, please?
Yeah, please order
Thank
French
you.
fries and eat too, but mute yourself. Can you? There you go. All right. I think I'm back to minus French fries.
Masood, now you're muted.
You did. Okay. Can you hear me all right? All right. Wonderful. Thank you. So anyway, as I was going through my emotions on that TV interview, I said, well, Hitler started a Jewish registry back in Germany. You saw what happened. This is America. It's not going to happen here. So on that show, I announced that on your show, I'm announcing I'm going to start a movement called Anti-Hate Registry, and I will bring everybody together. Obviously, that answer shocked the host. That answer shocked me as well because I didn't know. And the response was overwhelming from the community. So the very first thing I did, I incorporated this movement as a nonprofit, nonpartisan, and started a board of advisory board of representing different communities and elected officials of both parties. And that's the time, the very first one that I reached out to my friend here, Arno and Pardeep, because my focus was how I'm going to do this. Based on my 9/11 experience, engagement was critical to actually remove some of these conceptions that people have. So I was looking for real life stories of people. And Arno's story that you're going to hear today with what happened at Sikh temple shooting is a real life stories of two people, how they came together and started promoting peace. So I started recruiting some of those advisory board members, start sharing it. The same example of a Muslim community. A 21-year-old son was killed because of misconception. The father went to the court, and the last day he made the announcement, look at this guy's face, and said, you were misguided, you killed my son. I am Muslim, I practice my religion, Islam. I will forgive you today because Islam teaches forgiveness. So all of those people are on my board, whether it's a KKK leader, neo-Nazi, all of those people, because I take them to classroom. The other thing was how to empower these students. So we have Arno, we have Pardeep, we have other people. we take them to classroom because that resonate with all sorts of people, particularly youth. So I created a student ambassador board. Now, a number of these, because of the positive impact of this movement, number of these students who are on my student ambassador board, different schools, have started chapters of Viameni United Against Hate. And now there are 5 chapters overseas, and we have a business advisory council that also financially support this movement. Now, based on what we have seen so far, while we are making impact, we also have some concerns about the way things are happening. You saw that what happened in Chicago. 6-year-old boy was killed simply because was a Palestinian Muslim. That is a tragedy. So things that happen overseas also have impact on what happened here. So the way we have to deal with this kind of thing is 2 ways that I always think about. One idea that promotes the real life stories of people. A lot of people are reacting out of fear that has been created, unfortunately, sometimes by our mainstream media and also some elected officials. So I think it's critical to build the unity is to have the elected officials of both parties condemning the strongest way possible of these kinds of acts, just like the way they did it when 9/11 took place. So one of the things that I'm working on right now is creating a Wisconsin nonpartisan unity council where I'm going to reach out to elected officials of both parties to co-chair. I'm also working on creating a national unity caucus, nonpartisan, to do the same thing. So once we do the education and take this approach, I think we're going to make a huge impact. With that, I'm going to ask Arno to actually share his story, part of what we do through Viameni United Against Hate.
Thank you, Masood. Thank you, Sam, and everybody at Leader Ethics and all of our sponsors. I really appreciate the effort that has been put into this event. I'm also happy to see everyone joining. I appreciate you all giving us a part of your day and making it a priority to bring about a society that's less hateful. As mentioned in my bio, I call myself a storyteller. That's basically what I do for a living. My meat and potatoes is speaking engagements. I've been doing it for 14 years and also written 2 books, and I've been involved in filmmaking recently as well. All of my storytelling is informed by my past as a white nationalist from 1987 to 1994. Looking back at my life, I try to understand what led me into white nationalist hate groups and what led me out. Those are the 2 most frequently asked questions that I get. I'm going to head off some of the questions right now to answer those questions. Other than that, though, I look forward to any thoughts and questions the audience may want to share. And I'll remind them that nothing's off limits. I'm happy to answer any question. The more difficult, the better. As far as how I got involved in white nationalism, my story is a bit of an outlier. I grew up in a nice house in a nice neighborhood. I never went hungry. I never took a beating. I've been working now in counter-violent extremism internationally for 14 years. And in this space, I'm what's known as a former, as in a former violent extremist. I have friends who are formers from every possible type of violent extremist ideology you can think of. I know many other former white nationalists. I know a number of former Muslim supremacists, as my colleague Mubin Shaikh calls that form of violent extremist ideology. One of my closest friends is a former Antifa from Denmark named Søren Lerg. And Søren and I would have killed each other 30 years ago. Today, we meet to help kids overcome hate and division. We work to organize community meals and build things like skate parks that create community resiliency and unity amongst young people. Now, all of the aforementioned former friends I have are, if you listen to their stories, they're very rife with adverse childhood experiences, as it's put in the mental health industry. In my case, if you're just looking at a cursory view of my childhood, it wasn't very adverse. And I don't think it was, even from my perspective. I think there's billions of children on this planet who would feel like they won the lottery if they were able to switch childhoods with me, because I really had everything I needed. Though I grew up in a suburb of Milwaukee that was very well to do, and by the standards of that suburb, I was like the poor kid. But by global standards, my family was fantastically wealthy. The issue in my life growing up was my father's alcoholism. And when I say that, a lot of people think like, well, dad must have been abusive or mean, but my dad wasn't a mean drunk. He was a fun drunk. And what that meant for a little boy was, when dad was drunk, we're going to shoot guns in the basement and light off fireworks in the backyard. When I do talks with Party, he reminds me that's not a normal thing for most people. And I understand that, but it was normal for me. And I had a lot of fun doing that, but it wasn't fun for my mother. There were times when she was working 2 jobs to keep the lights on and the bills paid in our nice house in a nice neighborhood. And the stress of having the entire financial future of our house on her shoulders was really difficult for her. And her relationship with my dad was horrible. They were constantly arguing about his drinking, about money, about all the pressures that alcoholism can put on a relationship and on a household. And throughout my childhood, my mother was miserable. She was suffering. I saw that, and rather than be a good kid and be like, hey, mom, I love you, how can I help? I started to lash out at other kids. I started to distance myself from my mom and my dad, who, despite his disease, loved me very much. And of course, as I distanced myself from the adults in my life who loved me, my misery grew worse. And I started escalating my antisocial behavior. I was a bully on the school bus in kindergarten. I developed a taste for antisocial behavior and lashing out and repulsing people. And that very quickly became like an addiction. I needed more and more of the antisocial behavior to get the same kind of thrill that I got the first time I was acting out. So I went from being a bully on the school bus to fights in the schoolyard, to breaking and entering, to vandalism. When I was 14 years old, I started drinking myself. By the time I was 16, I was a full-blown alcoholic. I had been familiar with violence since I was a little kid, and hate was just another part of the rush. That's when I was exposed to white nationalist ideology through white power skinhead music. I had been involved in the punk scene, and I was screaming in bands for a couple of years. And I heard this music that told me the reason I was angry and the reason I was hateful was because I was a white warrior fighting for his race, who was in danger of extinction from this ominous Jewish plot to kill all the white people on the planet Earth. And I really hope that sounds ridiculous to everyone on this call. It should sound ridiculous to any thinking person. But to 16-year-old Arno, it was literally music to my ears. It validated this normal teen angst that I felt, that I think every teenager feels at one point, and it twisted it to serve the ideology of white nationalism, to divide people into groups by skin color. I convinced myself that I was white, and that as a white man, I had to fight for the white race. And I also convinced myself that everyone was out to get me, and everyone who looked like me. And that's a really important part of radicalization, is establishing that in-group, out-group dynamic. We're the good guys. We're oppressed by the evil bad guys. The bad guys must be stopped at all costs, even if that means exterminating them. And that's a narrative that's not particular to white nationalism. It's actually a narrative that's common to all violent extremist ideologies, whether we're talking about Hamas or the so-called Islamic State or the Ku Klux Klan or any neo-Nazi group du jour or Antifa. You see this common theme of us versus them, us being the noble good guys, them being the evil bad guys, and by any means necessary, the bad guys must be stopped. I bought into this narrative. I started my own white power skinhead band with some buddies of mine. It was like a magnet to every angry white kid in Wisconsin. Our group grew from 5 guys to 10 guys to 30 guys to a peak of about 150 people in like 91 or so. And as my friends and I radiated hate and violence out into the world reflected that back to us. There's so many old sayings that have become passe or this sound cheesy at times, but the whole live by the sword analogy is very apt. When you broadcast hate and violence into the world is going to give it back to you. I'm a Buddhist today. I believe in karma, and karma is not necessarily like you do good things happen to you. You do bad things happen to you. But it is a matter of cause and effect. When you put good things into the world, they have reverberations that cause other good things to happen. And same with bad things. And if when you live by hate and violence, you create an environment where your people are going to hate you back, and they're going to respond to your violence with violence of their own. I was involved in white nationalism for 7 years. I got out because it was exhausting to think and live that way. When you are a white nationalist or any other sort of violent extremist, anyone who doesn't think like you is your enemy. Now, while white nationalists, again, like all violent extremists, claim to speak for their in-group, white nationalists will claim to speak on behalf of all white people, the same way Hamas claims to speak on behalf of all Muslims, or the so-called Islamic State claims to speak on behalf of all Muslims. But the fact is that none of those groups think in lockstep. And race is a 400-year-old lie that has been creating suffering in our society since then, and it continues to. And one of the many facts of life that make the idea of race so preposterous is the idea that everyone who looks alike thinks alike. And when I was a white nationalist, I expected everyone who looked like me to be firmly on my side, because I believed the story that pitted us against everyone else. I believed the story that told me the lack of melanin in my skin made me different and superior to everyone else. And the fact is that life doesn't support any of that. Life shows you that every single human being is actually a unique individual, and that we're not political abstractions. We have a personhood unto our own. Even the most identical of twins growing up in the same household in the same environment are two uniquely individuals. The lie of race became more apparent the more time I spent out in the world. There were people like a Jewish boss, a lesbian supervisor, Afro-American and Latino coworkers who treated me with kindness when I least deserved it, but when I needed it most. And in doing so, most importantly, they demonstrated for me how a human being should treat another human being. They demonstrated for me what life could be like if I set aside this lie ideology that I was trying to adopt as my identity. And also, I would say, as importantly, they demonstrated to me that you can't group people together by the color of their skin, or by their religion, or by their sexuality, or their gender identity. Because, again, every one of us is a unique individual. And when we can see that individuality, violent extremist ideologies that depends on things like race or religion or nationality or political ideas just can't function. So I think that's a really important antidote to consider when we're talking about hate, is to see every person as a unique individual. And I just want to attribute that. There's a brilliant young thinker I know named Chloe Valdary, and she started an org called Theory of Enchantment. You can find that at theoryofenchantment.com. And one of the principles of the character development curriculum she teaches is that idea that we are all unique individuals and not political abstractions. That point alone, I think, is incredibly powerful in combating hate. the exhaustion that built up over 7 years trying to believe these lies of race and separation that shaped the white nationalist ideology brought me to a point where I was looking for an excuse to leave. And those acts of kindness I experienced from my boss and my coworkers were absolutely crucial as well. In 1994, my girlfriend and I broke up, and I found myself a single parent to our 18-month-old daughter. A couple months after that, after a concert my band had played, a second friend of mine was shot and killed in a street fight. And that's when it hit me that if I didn't change my ways, death or prison was going to take me from my daughter. I spent a number of years just trying to acclimate to society after that. Being a man of extremes, I went from being a violent, hateful racist to being a peaceful, respectful, loving raver on the south side of Chicago, spending time with thousands of people of every possible ethnicity, socioeconomic background, gender identity, sexual orientation you can imagine, and loving every minute of it. Really just seeing the possibility of human beings having a genuine spiritual love for each other and not buying into all these things, all these ways to other ourselves. I quit drinking in 2004. I started writing in 2007. On the MLK holiday of 2010, I went public with my story, really in hopes of reaching kids who are in my position, who may have been seduced by not just white nationalism, but any sort of violent extremist ideology. And I started a nonprofit called Life After Hate in August of 2009, actually. And I used that as, it was an online magazine that I used to self-publish my first book. I was really poured 3 years of my life into that. And by August 5th, 2012, Life After Hate had become a very vibrant online literary magazine. We had over 200 articles from over 100 different authors from all over the planet, in I think 6 different languages. And it was really like an engine of human compassion. And I've kind of supported the growth of the organization and the publicity of it by doing speaking engagements. And I developed a bit of a platform as like the former white nationalist guy by the time August 5th, 2012 rolled around. On August 5th, 2012, a man who I used to be walked into the Sikh temple of Wisconsin and he murdered 7 people. Baba Punjab Singh, Ranjit Singh, Sita Singh, Prakash Singh, Suvej Singh Katra, Paramjit Kaur, and Pardeep Kalika's father, Satwant Singh Kalika. The man who committed this atrocity, his name was Wade Page, and he was a member of the gang that I had helped to start in the late 1980s. He was also involved in white power bands. I would be stunned if he had never heard of my band. He was likely a fan of it. We'll never know because Wage was injured in a firefight with Oak Creek police who responded to the shooting, and he ended up taking his own life. A couple months after the shooting, Satwant's eldest son, Pardeep, reached out to me, really trying to understand how could someone walk into a place of worship and start murdering people, and then what can we do about it as a society? I believe the answer to both those questions is practice. When we practice something, we become familiar with it, we embody that thing, and it becomes muscle memory. If you look at a pro athlete or a great musician or a great artist, they master their crafts by repetition. If you throw a football a couple hundred times a day, you might reach the point where our new guy, Jordan Love, go Jordan. You might reach the point of becoming a NFL quarterback. And that's what that repetition does. It creates a muscle memory. So you're not thinking about how to throw the ball. You're just throwing it where you want to throw it. When you practice hate and violence, that becomes familiar to you. When hate and violence are familiar to you, things like love and compassion and kindness and forgiveness are not only unfamiliar to you, they're terrifying to you. You don't want anything to do with these most noble aspects of human life. And instead, you find a perverted sense of comfort in hate, the same way that a drug addict would find comfort in heroin, or an alcoholic like myself would find comfort in alcohol. So practice is what made Wade Page so miserable that nothing but homicide followed by suicide made sense. He was radicalized while a member of the United States military in 1998. So by 2012, he had practiced hate and violence for 14 years. What can we do about it as a society? And I think this is really important to what our session here is about. The answer is also practice. As I mentioned, my course was changed by people who were brave enough to treat me with kindness when I least deserved it. Now, it's easy to be nice to nice people. It's very difficult to be nice to jerks. It's difficult to be nice to people who are hateful and violent. But those are the people who need that kindness the most. And I'll make a point here. I'm not a pacifist. There do arise times where violent people who are intent on hurting others and themselves need to be neutralized. And there are times, unfortunately, where force is the only option for that. But for all of the times in between, if you're having a discussion with a coworker and it gets heated, you're having a hard time finding common ground over an issue, whether it's an issue at work or if it's an issue in global geopolitics, that's when kindness really becomes most important and most crucial. And that's when kindness can make the difference between two people walking away in a huff and two people developing a new form of respect and friendship. Respect and friendship and happiness are really the cornerstones of a healthy society. And I think if we're going to combat hate as a community, as a group, through great organizations like We Are Many United Against Hate, we need to think about that day-to-day action, that day-to-day practice of kindness, of compassion, of forgiveness and gratitude. The more familiar we are with those noble qualities, the happier we're going to be, and the more of a guide we'll become towards people who are in having a rough time and trying to deal with their trauma. We all have that capacity to lead them to a better place. So I'm really grateful to Masood and everyone who's helped lead me to a better place over the years. And again, I'm grateful to everyone on the call. Thank you.
Well, thank you both, Masood and Arno. It is just absolutely inspiring to hear both of your stories. Both of you have had personal experiences that led you to this. Arno, I must admit, as you were talking, that I was. It's just a powerful, powerful story that you have been through. A few questions for the two of you here. First, what is the role, do you think, of social media in promulgating hate today in society? You had this phrase, Arno, where you talked about acquiring the taste, right? And once you acquired the taste, it was really hard to turn away, and you just wanted more and more of that. Is social media making this easier for young people to acquire the taste, as it were, and to then find compatriots for their hatred online?
Yeah, it's all too easy to just like point a finger at social media and technology, but that's because it's where the finger should be pointing. Sometimes that's the case. I at the same time, I do think it's kind of a cop-out for people to just be like, well, social media ruined everything. Well, the fact is that social media is a technology like anything else. Fire is a technology, perhaps the oldest one that humankind has mastered at times. And as we all know in Wisconsin, within a month or two, fire will keep us all alive through the winter as our homes are heated. But if we're not careful, we have a kitchen accident or HVAC isn't up to par, a fire can burn our home down. So that's the nature of technology, that it can be good or evil, and whether it is really up to us. Now, all that being said, I do think that the biggest difference between the time we're in right now in October of 23 and the time I was radicalized as a white nationalist in 1987 is social media. In 1987, there was not social media. Masood and I actually did a talk at Baraboo High School a couple of years ago after there was an incident where the graduating class had thought it was clever to do like Sieg Heil salutes in their class photo. And I told those kids, I'm like, And of course, I felt like the old man. This dates me, but when I was a kid, we had to piss people off one by one. We had to go up to every single person we wanted to make angry. Whereas you kids nowadays got it so easy. You just put it on your camera, do phones, and put it on the interwebs, and now everybody's pissed off at once. And there's a lot of truth to that. Honestly, it's a kid pulling a prank at a high school in 1987. It was pretty localized to that high school, and not to minimize what happened in Baraboo. It was more than just a prank, and as we're seeing now, like anti-Semitism is a very serious issue. But that is a big difference in the dynamic. Is that what once it's a cliche thing to say now, but people in my generation are like, well, I'm sure glad there wasn't social media when I was a kid, or I'd be in a lot of trouble. And that certainly is true for me. So social media like amplifies youth angst. It amplifies our hateful ideas. A lot of what we do at Parents for Peace, which people can find at parentsforpeace.org with the number 4, is we treat hate as an addiction. And as an alcoholic, I can testify that you get addicted to hate the same way you get addicted to alcohol. And when this screen is our access to our drug of choice, which is hate, it's always with us. And social media silos things. So if I'm liking this, I like that. I like what this guy says. Oh, I like what that girl says. Okay, I'm liking that. I don't like that. Then it starts showing us only what we agree with. So if you dabble in hate, and all of a sudden you have this cavalcade of hate coming at you on every screen you're connected to all day long, it's siloing you, it's amplifying, it's not challenging anything that you're believing in, and that's unfortunately a very viable means for hatred to spread and to propagate.
Masood, is there anything we can be doing about that as community leaders, as educators, as parents?
Yes, about the social media, I think as Arno said, but I would turn it around the other way as well. This is my experience. The percentage of people who want to kill people is very small. Okay? So why, when they do something bad, that everybody knows about it? So what happened to 95+ population worldwide that is so nice, they treat everybody with respect? So yes, there is a technology piece to it, but what kind of messaging we can create using the same platform that can go out to all of these people, including them? So there is some piece to it. How do they code that information that everybody understand it? Can we learn something from them and still use some of it? Because social media is not going to go away anywhere. But I think the idea is that what are the best ways we can communicate our message in a simple way that reaches out to 100% of the population?
Excellent. Well, thank you both for that. What about, so leader ethics, one of the things we do is we try to push our political leaders to act ethically. What is the role of our political leaders in this whole issue of hate? I mean, we obviously live in a fraught time where, again, the political leaders can use those same methods to amplify messages that seem to then pack into some of that hatred in society. What should we expect? What should we as citizens demand from our leaders?
I can start out by saying that they really play a major role in building unity. And I always give this as an example of what happened the next day after 9/11. The elected officials of both parties, despite their differences, came together and condemned that the strongest way possible, that led into some of those bipartisan, legislations, and then we started working together. Okay, so that was the international terrorist attack. Then what happened on January 6th? So domestic terrorism happened right here at the US Capitol. But you see the difference between the two parties? What happened is that despite the differences in the past, we used to work together. Now, even though parties believe something is good, but still they don't want to talk about it because they're more concerned about losing elections rather than representing the community. That's what I mentioned when I was talking about we are many united against hate. Yes, education, real life stories that Arno talked about, bearable, all those things that we have done are critical. But the other critical component part of this story has to be how should we work together? So if some incidents happen, regardless if the shooter is a Muslim or a white supremacist, both parties have to come out right away and condemn the strongest way possible. So that's what my intent is, to put little structure around that and create at a local and a state level this nonpartisan unity council and a national nonpartisan unity council when we reach out. And that's the role that leader ethics and others who are on this call can play, to reach out to elected officials of both parties and ask them to serve on this, and all of us as a stakeholder. It's a more proactive approach than reactive approach. Media is another thing that we need to think about, how they portray these things. People react. What happened, what I'm hearing, the 6-year-old, the guy was watching the conservative talk show just a few weeks before that one. So my point is that we look into all this media and start educating that the biggest thing that I believe in America we have is the freedom of speech. You can say anything you want. Unity is important than uniformity. Differences of opinion are critical. But the important thing is that about the US Constitution, about what's involved with this, I think we definitely have to get into the bottom of these things and find strategies to engage elected officials of both parties to make things happen. Otherwise, we're going to be looking into trouble.
Arno, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with everything Masood pointed out. I think there's obviously there's a very important connection between media and politics. They're both sadly functioning in the same way right now. The way media works nowadays is, and it's amazing that our technology is progressing so fast we can't even keep up with our own language to describe it. The word clickbait comes to mind when we're talking about media, and it's the idea of like you're clicking on a headline in order to read a story, but the fact that nowadays it's touch bait. I don't know what you, that sounds a little kind of creepy, but the point is that any media piece needs touches, it needs clicks. That's how it converts into money. And the more sensational a media piece is, the more touches and clicks it's going to get. There's an old saying in news that movies have been made around called "If it bleeds, it leads," and it's this idea that like bloody, violent stories are going to get more eyes on it and get more attention than the cat that was rescued out of a tree by a fire engine. That gets just a little 30-second blip at the end, kind of good news palate cleanser on a traditional news format. But it's still and that's how politicians work today, unfortunately, as well. You don't have to name names. You can just say the left and the right. And the further you get to the left or to the right, the more reliant you are on that opposite pole to orient your messaging, to orient your base, and most importantly, to fundraise. So when far right guy makes some outrageous statement, far left media team is right on it. They scoop it up and they blast it out to all their followers in an email. And they say, "Oh my God, do you see what this guy said? You need to give us money right away so we can defeat him." And then their guy goes out and says something ridiculous. And here's the far right media team scooping that up, blasting it out to their followers. "Oh, look at this, what this crazy socialist said. Save America right now. You got to give us all your money." And both sides exist in this really ironic symbiosis. They couldn't raise money if it wasn't for the other one to point fingers at and throw stones at. and they actually claim to counter each other when in actuality they support each other. So it's hard to say like what politicians should and shouldn't do, because the sad fact is if you go into politics nowadays and you don't play that game, you're not going to win. You're not going to be able to fundraise, and you're not going to be able to compete with the people who fundraise like that, which means that you won't stand a chance. So to me, the most inspiring news in this arena, I'm kicking all kinds of websites now, but there's one called mobilevoting.org, and it's by a brilliant effort to make voting on phones secure and viable on a nationwide basis. They've had this program in pilot for a number of years. They've had successful elections where troops overseas were able to vote on their phones. And the reason I bring it up is because the way our elections work in the States is our primary elections have very low turnout, but only the polls turn out. And that means for general election, we have very polarized candidates. We don't have people who have any interest in a moderate center. And if we can increase the turnout for primaries, the idea is we can increase the level of moderation that our general elected candidates have. And then again, like I totally agree with Masood, unity, not uniformity. Diversity of thought is far and away the most important diversity that there is in human existence, in my opinion, because again, it shows that we are all unique individuals and we're not defined by our skin color. So when we have a moderate center where we can come in and have civil discussions about how policy should work, a little bit of left, a little bit of right, that's how we progress as a society. That's how we become more resilient against hate. And in order to do that, there's going to need to be some serious changes happening.
Well, thanks to both of you for that. Yeah, you both actually answered another question I had about the balancing of tolerance and freedom, right? That this is the challenge in a very free society, especially one where we know hate speech is considered protected speech under the First Amendment. But I think you both hit that point of how we do it, which is we do it by demanding better, which I completely appreciate. Both of you spend a lot of time, and I'll just remind everybody, if you do have questions, we have a few minutes here, so if you have questions, please post them in the chat. But one question that came up is you both do a lot of work in schools. You talk with a lot of young people. Masood in particular, obviously, with the organization, but I know you've talked with a lot of young people as well. How is that work going? Are you seeing progress? Are you seeing younger people captured by the messages that you share? And do you feel hopeful as a result for where we're heading as a society?
Yes, I am, because I mentioned when I take Arno and Pardeep in classrooms, and I can tell you when I'm done with these students, they call and they say, well, after listening to Arno and Pardeep's story, our lives completely changed. And I want you to come to school so that all 800 students can listen to the same message. So it's resonating with them. Two areas. One, they want to be the leader at that stage. And our target, Arno can tell, the young generation is the best target to recruit. Hate people, hate groups, target those young people. And that's where Arno and I are focusing on, reaching out to this even as early as middle schools. What we are seeing is, talking to my student ambassador board students, is that not only they want to bring unity in their classrooms and communities, but they also want to go to other schools and start actually telling them what they're doing. And then we have monthly calls where we share some of these best practices as well. As a result of their activities, these international delegates who came from overseas started a chapter of We Are Many United Against Hate. So they really become an ambassador to that. And that's one of the reasons, based on their needs, we are in the process of hiring a unity director, where we are going to have identified the best educational program and civic education in the country and overseas, and start bringing it and giving something to them. In fact, we have a T-shirt now that these students wear, that a logo, and then it says, if you see something, say something, and I added another line at the bottom, do something. When I added that line, these students got motivated. So when they go from their classrooms to other schools for purposes of education, they wear those T-shirts. So I think I'm very optimistic what I'm hearing from our young generation. And we're also planning to do sometimes in February a youth summit where that will be led by youth, and we're going to invite all of youth from different schools all across the state to actually listen to what these people are doing, what these students are driving. So I'm very optimistic that things are going to change as we build this relationship with these youth in classrooms.
I certainly share Masood's optimism. Anytime I'm having a hard time, which is quite often nowadays, it's an odd position to be in when people look to you for answers when atrocities like what happened in Israel and what's happening in Gaza right now are happening in the world. Like a lot of people want to share their opinions on that. And for me, it's just like I would just like to not have to answer, not make a statement. But anytime I'm in those positions and I'm feeling like worn out, I look to young people for guidance and for inspiration. And time and time again, anytime I've felt down and felt intimidated or burnt out doing this work, I have been inspired not only for the reason to keep doing it is to help shape the future of the society that our young people are inheriting, but also to look for them for leadership and guidance. And again, to emphasize what Masood is saying, that's what young people are after is to have a voice and to have an ability to have an impact, to matter really to society and to themselves. And I think when we introduce the idea of service as a means of building character and developing a healthy sense of identity, purpose, and belonging, it can be super transformative, not just for that individual who's engaging in these service efforts, but also for the rest of society to see the great work that young people are doing. And so I think the youth of today are more concerned than ever about things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And at the same time, I think they're developing the critical thinking skills to not just be like spoon-fed these words like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to really like think about what those words embody and what they really mean. Is it just like checking off tick boxes? Okay, we got all these complexions in a row. We're cool for diversity. It's like, no, it's actually diversity of thought is more important than arbitrary things like the color of our skin. And I see young people taking the lead in that space over and over again, and I'm very proud to be able to follow them.
Well, we've got about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask a question that, pardon me, probably requires a longer response, but we'll just get a quick response from each of you here. How can we, in our personal and professional lives, help those who are suffering from hate, to give them a measure of solace and yet not offend? Because obviously that's a fine balance when you know somebody is a target of hate speech, that someone is a target of people who are hating. How might we best as individuals just show them that we care but not cross boundaries?
I think what's really important in that process is just listening and doing it without judgment, without prescription. It's all of us human beings, myself as bad as anyone, have a tendency when somebody's talking, we're like, okay, we're just taking inventory and be like, oh, okay, now I have a point. I'm going to make a point about that. I need to say this. I need to say that. So rather than listening to understand, we're listening to respond. Like as if every conversation is some kind of debate that our livelihood is at stake on winning, when actually if we can make a connection and actually listen to understand with everyone that we're listening to, whether they're a perpetrator of hate or a target of hate, that's how you create those bonds that ultimately lead to a more resilient society that's less conducive to hate.
Masood, would you
Yeah,
agree?
I think that's excellent. Yeah, I agree with that. I think Arnold laid it out pretty good. And that's the strategy that I use, because after 9/11, I used to get, a lot of these hate letters in the mail. People write me up, hey, don't believe in your religion, that kind of thing. I always go back to them, and they have their address also, so they're not hiding. I will always write them back to say, thank you so much, Mr. Jim, writing this letter. And then I would say, you're not the only one who has misconception about my religion, but this is what I'm doing as an immigrant in this country, and I will lay out all of these events that I'm organizing. And in fact, I have a link of all of the recorded messages, and I will say, if you have any further questions, I'll be happy to sit down with you. The second thing I do when I sit down with these people with different opinion, I never ask them or question them about their opinion the very first meeting or so. I talk about why I came to this country and why I started this movement and why I'm doing it. Once they listen to my message, then 2 or 3 sittings I have seen myself, they change themselves. This is the right thing, what I'm hearing versus what I was doing. So I never question, because as soon as you question them, they're believing in whether it's right or wrong, and the conversation doesn't get deep into that. So I never question that. I sit down and talk about what is good for this country, why I came to this country, why I'm doing it. That really changes people's perception.
Well, Masood Akhtar and Arno Michaelis, thank you so much for your wisdom, for sharing your stories, and for sharing a lot of hope and optimism with both of us. And thank you for all the good work that you're doing. And now over to Lee Rosh.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Well, thank you, Sam, and thank you for moderating today's program. It's a very important and powerful message. And thank you, Arno and Masood, for being part of this program, but most importantly, for the important work that you're doing. And I sincerely wish you the very best in your journey. And now to all, I'd like to just highlight some information about some upcoming programs. The first is entitled Elections in Wisconsin, and it's interesting that at this time, the most recent Marquette poll shows that 1 out of 3 Wisconsinites still question the integrity of the 2020 election. And now we're going into a very important election in 2024. So we have a panel, really outstanding panel coming to La Crosse. It consists of Kathy Bernier, former state senator and former county clerk. It also includes Megan Wolf, who is the administrator for the Wisconsin Elections Commission. It includes Ginny Dankmeyer, who is a La Crosse County elections clerk, and Nikki Elson, who is the City of La Crosse elections clerk. And there'll be some opening remarks by former Assembly Speaker Mike Hipsch. It's on October 25th, and go to the Leader Ethics website for more information. The second program is in a partnership with Rotary, and the Rotary clubs in the La Crosse area have brought in a speaker, Katie Harbarth, who is the founder of an organization called Anchor Change. Formerly, she was in a senior policy role at Facebook, and actually it was at the time of the 2016 and 2020 elections. And after leaving Facebook, she has some very direct and pointed information to share about their operations. So these are some outstanding programs. That one is on November 2nd. There's more information on the Leader Ethics website. Again, thank you all for being part of today's program, and best wishes in your journey. Thank you.